Target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, adopted by all United Nations member states, calls on all to get on track in order to eliminate all forms of child labor by 2025. Statistics show that 168 million children are still in child labor all over the world. All supply chains, from agriculture to manufacturing, services to construction, all run the risk of child labor. According to the International Labour Organization, ILO, child labor has no place in well-functioning and well-regulated markets or in any supply chain. Therefore, the Director General of the organization, Guy Ryder, says it is within our means to make the future of work a future without a child labor. ILO brought together some of its social partners to look into this issue. So on your program Policy on Track today, we shall bring you contributions of the panelists, the experiences of some of them, the methods they used in tackling child labor, simply the successful approaches, so that as a nation we can borrow a leaf from them. Still on our bouquet for today is an interactive session between the social partners in the labor market, particularly the private sector and workers' organization. They both agreed that businesses are grappling with extremely traumatic times. My name is Mo Gbone Wilkie, your host, and you are welcome to today's edition of your program, Policy on Track. Let's bring you first stories that made headlines in the last 1 week. Teachers at King's College Lagos and Federal Government College Idoani, Ondo State, on Thursday, 15 September, started an indefinite strike over non-payment of their outstanding salaries. The teachers advised parents and guardians not to release their children and wards for resumption to avoid subjecting them to untold hardship.
Speaking under the umbrella body of Association of Senior Civil Servants of Nigeria, the teachers said the decision not to pay salaries in these schools since May 2016 may so extend to other schools in due course if nothing is done to resist it.
The strike commenced today.
We have become beggars. We are begging from one place to the other to be able to manage life for this 4 months ago. Right, they say salary, take home pay. The take home pay does not even take us to bus stop, not to take off our homes. And now that it is not there, what do you expect teachers to do? If they give us our salary today, we resume work today.
They emphasized that other 102 federal unity colleges have been mobilized to join the strike if the federal government remains adamant.
What worries some of our colleagues that need medical attention cannot have money to afford medication.
The group regretted that the present administration, which promised change for the better, had reneged on its promise, starting on the wrong note by not paying workers' salaries.
The Minister of State for Aviation, Hadi Sirika, during an unscheduled visit to the corporate headquarters of Aero Contractors, appealed to workers to shelve the protest tagged Occupy Aero. He promised that the federal government will make sure that their interest is protected.
After the announcement of Aero Airlines' suspension of operations and directive given to staff to embark on indefinite leave of absence with immediate effect, workers have continued a peaceful protest which started on the 1st of this month. The angry workers vowed to occupy Aero until they are adequately compensated, as this is the only way for them to draw the attention of their employer.
We believe and we know we are respecters of the law in Nigeria, and we know that there is no law that permits any employer to do what they have done.
The Minister of State for Aviation, Hadi Sirika, had paid an unscheduled visit where he assured them that the federal government would intervene. Making good his promise, the minister met with stakeholders and informed journalists after the closed-door session that Aero had internal issues, but the federal government will take a stand in the interest of the nation, the airline, and the workers.
What happened with Aero Contractors, everybody knew that they were having some problems internal. I did meet with the management of Aero Contractors, and I also met with the union today, but I was not able to meet with AMCON. We saw where the problems are coming from, we can almost look at the solutions.
The minister also promised that pensioners of the liquidated airline, Nigeria Airways, will get their entitlements soon.
That child labor has no place in well-functioning and well-regulated markets is evident. But the reality is that today, child labor remains widespread in global supply chains as well as in supply chains producing for local and national consumption. It is sad that 168 million children are in child labor. 85 million of these are found in hazardous work. The remaining 99 million are in agriculture, mining, manufacturing, tourism, producing goods and services consumed by millions every day.
In the mid-2000s, the El Salvadorian sugarcane industry and the government of El Salvador joined forces in a groundbreaking partnership to tackle child labor in sugarcane harvesting. Regular visits to sugarcane fields by Ministry of Labor inspectors and private monitors were conducted to ensure that there were no children working. This and other measures made the incidence of child labor in sugarcane harvesting drop sharply by some 70%. In West Africa, the cocoa supply chain includes everyone involved in growing, harvesting, and processing cocoa beans to become the chocolate that we eat. In the beginning of the chain, there are close to 2 million smallholders farmed globally. After reports of widespread child labor and trafficking abuses in cocoa growing communities in West Africa, the world's major chocolate and cocoa processing companies, in collaboration with the ILO, implemented numerous projects to address the challenges of ridding the cocoa supply chain of child labor and trafficking violations. At the event held recently in Geneva, Switzerland, the panelists shared their perspectives. The ILO DG Guy Ryder says with free, compulsory, quality, basic education up to minimum age of work with redoubled effort by government, employers, workers' organizations and enterprises, child labor in supply chains can be stopped.
Adoption and enforcement of good laws and policies with strategic linkages between labour inspection, tracking of school enrolment and attendance, and other relevant public services. Needless to say, the fight against child labour also demands relentless efforts to assure decent jobs for parents, and policies must work in that same direction. From enterprises, we need a clear message of zero tolerance of child labour. They need to know what is happening in their supply chains and to back that up with action in their business practices and dealings with suppliers. And this, I believe, is the common expectation of business in the 21st century. Small farmers' cooperatives have improved livelihoods in supply chains, and cooperation amongst workers and small enterprises in supply chains can support the exercise of all rights of work in ways that top-down models sometimes cannot. And then there are, of course, consumers who want to support what is right.
No doubt progress is being made. The momentum is there, especially when there is a drop by 1/3 in the last decade. Political commitment by every government is required. Time for excuses from employers should be over.
Canada is also one of 30 countries that have implemented the children's rights and business principles. The 10 principles call on businesses to consider how their activities and business relationships affect children. Through our CSR strategy and international engagement, we encourage Canadian companies to engage with local communities and organizations representing workers, Indigenous communities, employers, and others in a meaningful and constructive way when concerns are raised. Companies that refuse to engage will not be able to access government's trade advocacy and economic support in foreign markets. So we're actively promoting responsible business practices. We expect all Canadian companies to respect human rights and labor rights.
Our challenge today is to better understand and identify the risk of child labor in the modern global economy and the effective action that can be taken by business and employers' organizations at different levels of their operations. Employers strive to demonstrate that they respect human rights and to act with due diligence to mitigate the risks of infringement. And there are a number of actions that have been taken by employers across the globe aimed at addressing child labor in the supply chain. These include assisting in eliminating child labor by complying with child labor laws and prohibiting the hiring of children in their own operations and in the supply chain. Where child labor is found to be in use, employers assist in ending this practice and transitioning children from the workplace. Employers strive to do this without causing hardship to the children or their families, because in East Africa we found that actually child labor was in many cases exacerbated by families that needed their income. And so it's important to take this into consideration, and there are programs that have been implemented to do this. Employers can also eliminate child labor from supply chains by sourcing products from ethically certified sources.
In the Volta region in Accra, children between the ages of 5 to 17 years are subjected to inhumane conditions. They go down the lake to get fish and detangle the nets. Through a model known as TRAC model, the employers and the unions ensure that every child is in school and that adults in the fishing business are doing their work decently.
So the Lake Volta, that is it's a man-made lake. Because it's man-made, it has a lot of tree stumps and shrubs under it. So fishing on Lake Volta is very hazardous. I mean, it's a dangerous area to go. Not to talk about children working there. A lot of children, like I said in the morning, get up as early as 4 a.m., running to the place, doing laying, casting out nets in the thing, coming back to come and see whether the net caught fish. In the process, some of the nets get entangled under the water, and the children are said to be the best to do that job. So unfortunately, they have to do it, and in the process, some of them lose their lives, some of them are injured, some of them, and nobody talks about it because it's in the middle of the water. And ironically, sometimes traditionally, it is believed that sometimes when some of those injuries occur, then the bumper harvest comes in. They can catch more fish. And this type of traditional belief also does not let communities drive processes of withdrawing this. But then with time, with the TRAC model, people have now come to the realization a lot of sensitization has taken place, a lot of education and mobilization and organizing, a lot of engagement, a lot of partners. Yeah, I've worked, when it is in the formal sector, of course, you have the tripartite. But when it comes to the informal sector, you have a lot of civil society groups. You don't have the physical presence of a government office in that village. The people involved, first and foremost, are the TRAC people themselves. The initiative comes, it is they who said they want their own children to go to school. So those of us outside the place provided some facilitatory roles. Most importantly is the Ghana Navy, who play a monitoring role at the beach. Now, at the beach, they have a role to play in terms of rescue, in terms of accident and the rest. But what we have now done is giving them education to put child labor as part of their monitoring business. Then we also have the Ministry of Fisheries, that is the government's department on fishery, resident there, also helping to give alternative livelihoods in terms of fishing culture and also alternative methods of fishing, and then for people to increase income to be able to take their own children to school.
The Food and Agriculture Organization, FAO, is also working in collaboration with the ILO, creating policies and sensitizing partners on ending child labor.
What is FAO doing to see that we eliminate child labor in agriculture?
Well, we're working very closely with the International Labour Organization within this partnership, this broader partnership, including agriculture and labour stakeholders, to work on preventative policies and create the conditions both through decent work policies and legislation and in terms of also awareness raising to really target policymakers, business practitioners, laborers in general, to really work on ending agricultural labor for children.
Given the fact that 60% of children in labor are in agriculture, how will it impact the agriculture business? Because in Nigeria, Africa, where I come from, there is the cry for diversification from oil to agriculture. So what would the impact be?
It would be more positive in terms of the fact that in order to ensure that we end rural poverty and that we ensure food security for all, we have to address the issue of child laborers in agriculture. In terms of the specificities of Nigeria, I'm unfortunately not able to address this issue, but I do think that's a question of government, of working across the supply chain with government, with business, private enterprises, with extension workers, with the whole supply chain to address the issue of how you would diversify, because it's a very, very complex issue. I mean, there are also social issues, health issues. I mean, there's a lot of, it's a very complex issue.
The National Bureau of Statistics says Nigeria contracted by 2.06% to record its lowest growth rate in 3 decades. The country is also battling an inflation rate at an 11-year high of 17.1% in the month of July. Critics say government policies made a bad situation even worse in its decision to delay devaluing the currency. This made many businesses struggle to get foreign currencies to pay for imports. For the president of the employers in the private sector, Larry Etta, lack of clarity about the economic agenda of the present government and some wrong policy choices have contributed to the current economic stagnation and recession.
Employers' organization represent a key asset in any society. Enterprises play key roles in the economic development of any nation. The Nigeria's Employers Consultative Association's president, Larry Etta, enumerates how the economic challenges in the country has impacted on the real sector. He enumerated decline in capacity utilization, closure of businesses, redundancies, and retrenchment as some of the fallouts.
The other thing is also certain policies that have also made, like I said, we had a mess which this government inherited. But I also think we inherited a mess and we've turned it into a disaster because of some wrong policy choices we took. Now, if we are now talking of deregulating the foreign exchange market, imagine if we had done this as far back as 15 months ago, or possibly even 1 year ago. The things we are asking about now, the foreign capital inflows would have come in. Why is this foreign capital inflow not coming in? I give you an example. Today, the government's revenue monthly is about $1 billion monthly. However, our requirement as a country in terms of import is $3 billion. So there's actually a gap of $2 billion. Now, if we didn't have the sad development in Niger Delta, perhaps we would have had more oil being pumped and maybe another 800,000 barrels per day would have been added into our revenue. Maybe that would have given us $1.7 billion. But if you have a situation where your demand for dollars is still $3 billion monthly, then you still have a gap. Now, it also means that we have a very huge import demand which has to be financed by dollars. The other one too is the fact that the central bank has also not been very helpful. I must say that the signals out of the central bank has been quite confusing. At one time, you had ban of the bureau de change. Now you had ban of 9 banks, then you had ban of 41 items. All those things have a way of spooking investors. It is very important that the signal from the central bank is consistent, because investors want to see consistency. Investors are lethargic when they have inconsistencies in policy. So it's very clear that we need to have a lot more coherence coming from the monetary authority. At one time you were reducing MPR, the next time you are increasing MPR. All these things are unhelpful. So why are foreigners not bringing in money? They are waiting to see whether we are consistent. And if we don't get those things right, we simply just paying lip service to the issue. So, and I think it is important that the leadership at Central Bank recognizes that it has a credibility deficit currently. And the sooner they begin to address that credibility deficit in terms of ensuring this policy consistency, the faster we would address some of the issues.
The workers' organization admits that private sector employers have lived above board despite the excruciating business climate.
We do know that particularly our employers in the private sector have been to a certain extent living above board, because if we x-ray your own level of good governance standards compared to our public sector employers, we will say yes, we are above average. We would love a situation where our public sector employers were elected, particularly on these issues of accountability, transparency, and respect for international laws in terms of corporate governance.
For you, our employers, the captains of industry, we must continue to salute your courage, that despite these challenges, you have continued to produce and have also continued to accommodate us, the working class, and also your partners in progress. The symptoms of this crisis are manifest in virtually every sphere of our national life. In the inflationary trend, in the economy, in the high cost of living, in the foreign exchange crisis, and the daily depreciation of the value of our currency. This certainly calls for a new approach to our developmental issues and challenges. And I think as social partners, NECA and organized labor can champion actually a cause for a new thinking on how best to respond to those issues. Because as NLC, we have watched the various commentaries, everybody speaking from the basis of his interests. And I think we have a cause. Our cause is that we must continue to manufacture at home. And we must continue to support you, the manufacturers and our employers, if we want our economy actually to swing and become stable. The idea of continuing to import virtually every product, including the very important product that God has given us, the petroleum product, I think it's time for us to stop all of that. And I think it's an avenue that we can try to look at new partnership for us to champion these causes. The best time also to respond to these issues is when the economies are in recession. I remember when Obasanjo came in 1999, the first thing he did in 2000 is to actually look at also the purchasing power of Nigerians. How do we get people to even buy things that we produce at home? If we don't buy, the economy will be stagnant. And therefore, people need to have the purchasing power to be able to purchase, for our manufacturers to continue to produce. So this is the logic.
I am Mo Ogbone Wilkie, your host on Policy on Track. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.